Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming for what I believe is the fourth installment of the forum. Today we will be presenting with Sally White's adventure across all the New York bridges. My only question from her, because I love to give this statistic, is how long have you been at friends' homes? And I know it hadn't been long, less than a year. And she is already so active. The first time I met her was actually on a trip to the Music Hall of Fame. Yes.
And Car Hall of Fame.
Yeah, whatever we want to call that. So please join me in welcoming Sally White and her adventure.
Thank you. I am so grateful to all of you for coming. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, the volume's okay. Yeah, this is kind of one of those crazy ideas that turned into a lot of fun. I will say more about this particular picture later, so you can think about it what you want, except this is the Brooklyn Bridge when it was under construction. The story begins about 50 years ago when I was a student at Earlham College. And almost all of these, this is me, all of these people with the exception of Susie were also students at Earlham College. Susie wasn't part of the group yet, but about 3 years later she married Paul, and so now she is part of the group. Len, was a philosophy professor at Earlham and he filled various other roles there. But when I was a senior, a group of us went to Scotland on foreign study, and Len was the professor that took the group, and some of us were in that group and some of us were not. And some of us stayed in touch with each other and some of us didn't. I lost touch with pretty much everybody after a few years, and we reconnected in the fall of 2021. But 20 years ago, Paul had an idea. And he wrote this idea down. He has this kind of essay or memo that he had written 20 years ago, and he said, "This is the all-day walk that I have planned to take with friends. I have enlarged the kind of relevant parts of it." But he said he wanted to begin in Bayonne, New Jersey, walk across a bridge, the Bayonne Bridge to Staten Island, and then take a ferry, the Staten Island ferry to Manhattan, and then walk across the Manhattan Bridge to Brooklyn, and then back across the Brooklyn Bridge to Manhattan, and then at the end of the day cross the George Washington Bridge. And his vision was that as we walked through space and time, we become aware of the choices that we make and the vistas that we see that are available to us on any given day. So let's do this trip, he said, and this is 20 years ago. And I don't imagine that 20 years ago it would have been possible to do it, because if you're taking subways and buses and whatever from one bridge to another, you've got to build in more time than we had. But 50 years later, here we are. This photograph was taken in the lobby of the Guggenheim Museum. And we haven't changed much, right? So we gathered, most of us, at Paul and Susie's house in Connecticut. And we drove down to Elizabeth, New Jersey, and checked into a motel there. And our plan had been to walk these 4 bridges on the Wednesday. It was the first Wednesday in October. But Hurricane Ian, the remnants of Hurricane Ian were coming through that day, and the weather forecast for New York was 30-mile-an-hour winds and rains. And I, for one, was not really keen on walking across bridges in that kind of weather. So we decided instead to spend the Wednesday going to museums. This is kind of the tail end of the pandemic. We took our masks off for the pictures, but we wore masks most of the day. And so the museums are still doing timed entrance, and we had to have a big conversation on Tuesday night about which museums did we want to go to and at what time and what would the day look like. And we decided on 3 museums. We went first to the Cooper Hewitt, which is the Design Museum of the Smithsonian. We then walked to the Guggenheim, and then we walked through Central Park to the American Museum of Natural History, where we had lunch, and then we had entry tickets for right after lunch. Maybe some of you or all of you know these museums, and these are stock photos of the 3 museums. We did not take those. We did take a subway, or actually I think this is Amtrak, to get into Manhattan, and then we came up the stairs, and here we are on 34th Street in front of Macy's, and it's raining, and there's Paul. That's the only one in our group that I could see in this picture. But it was, this, for somebody who grew up in Cleveland and was living at the time, I was still living down on the coast in Morehead City. This was really exciting to be in New York City, even on a rainy day. So we walked to the Cooper Hewitt Museum, which is in what was the Carnegie Mansion on Fifth Avenue in New York. And there was a show there. There were several shows that we saw, and I did not take lots of pictures of these, but there was one in particular that I was really curious about. The Cooper Hewitt Museum actually is a repository for examples of interior design. Nafis, do you know when the museum was established? This is my daughter, Nafis, who is an artist and knows these things, which I don't. Hi.
I don't know the answer to that one.
Okay, I think it was late 1800s, early 1900s. And we did not see those exhibits. It was like curtains and rugs and stair rails and molding and all of that designers could come in and view what the possibilities were if they were doing interior design. Now there are other kinds of design being exhibited and explored in this museum. And there was this one exhibit on designing peace, which I was really impressed with. Not apparently impressed enough to take any pictures, except this one. And this was kind of mounted in the stairwell, and it was inviting you to go and see the show. And in the show there were scale models and examples and drawings of people's suggestion for how to build, for example, monuments to peace. What kinds of monuments could we put up in some of these cities where we're taking down Confederate memorials, and what would be a peace monument that you could put up there? What's a monument you could build in New Orleans in retrospect, looking back at Hurricane Katrina and the destruction that Katrina had wrought? What is a kind of a monument that you could make along the border using as the kind of foundation the border wall that is in pieces along the southern border of the U.S. But I was really interested in this particular poster because what they talk about are these 8 pillars, positive peace pillars of a well-functioning government. And it occurred to me that I'm more aware of the presence or the absence of these peace pillars right now in this time in our history, and they include well-functioning government, equitable resource distribution, a free flow of information, good relations with neighbors, education, skills, and innovation, acceptance of the rights of others, a low level of corruption, and a sound business environment. Interesting pillars upon which to build a peaceful society. Interesting pillars that if you start to damage them, can do damage to a peaceful society. And in my professional career, I was a minister, and I couldn't resist this because this would have made a great sermon. Instead, it's a slideshow. What'd you say? Several. Yeah, you could do a series of 8 if you wanted to. After spending a couple of hours at the Cooper Hewitt, we walked down the street to the Guggenheim Museum in the rain. As you know, the museum was designed, I was informed at the last time I did this, by Frank Lloyd Wright. This is a picture from the lobby looking up at the skylight, And what you have, as you probably all know, wait, I'm trying to do this. There's this ramp, this spiral ramp that climbs or alternatively descends. And many of the paintings, and I think the current shows, are mounted along that walkway so that you can usually, I think, start at the top and walk down and see the artworks. When we were there this day, there was a show being installed, and so the walkway was closed. You could take an elevator up to the top, and there were galleries on the upper floors that were open. But I was incredibly impressed by the size of the paintings and by these, shoot, I keep hitting the wrong thing. These are packet crates for the paintings in the exhibit, and this is the painting of, I think it's Alex Katz, I believe. So we got to see some of these being installed. We got to see the curators doing the sort of strategizing for how should this be hung, how should it be lit, and so you get to see this little picture of behind the scenes of a museum that you may not really pay attention to if you go and the show is already mounted and you just read what's on the walls. My daughter, Nafis, had said to me, if I were going to the Guggenheim, I would want to see the Eva Hesse exhibit, and I didn't know anything about Eva Hesse. I don't know if any of you do. But she was you want to say a few words, Nafis, about? Okay. She was a modern artist. She worked she was born in Germany, but worked in New York in the 1960s, and did a lot of experimenting with new materials and new chemicals. In this particular piece, which is called Expanded Expansion, she had plexiglass rods, and between them she strung sheets of cheesecloth that she had painted with latex. And she was looking at the contrast of textures and kind of movement in the material, and how when this piece was first made, all the panels were kind of cream colored, but it's 50 years old and it had not been exhibited in 50 years. She finished the piece in 1968. She died of brain cancer in, I think it was 1969, and it was probably connected to these newly developed chemicals that she was experimenting with in her art. And the piece was donated by her family to the Guggenheim in 1972, and it had been in storage for 50 years. And there was a big conversation about, was this kind of an ephemeral piece that was pertinent when it was made, or was this something that it made sense to restore and re-exhibit after 50 years? And when I walked into the room, and they said, it's in 3 pieces, 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. This is the first time they had been reunited in 50 years, and you could walk into that room and you could just feel her there. It was so powerful to me. Anyway, so that's what we looked at the Guggenheim. Partly because we couldn't see all the paintings on the stairway. And then we went through Central Park and to the American Museum of Natural History, which is my personal favorite museum in New York, having been now in like 4 museums. This is the stock photo that you'll find if you look up the American Museum of Natural History. But when we were there, the statue in front has been removed, and I do not know what the plan is for replacing the statue. This is the statue. It was Theodore Roosevelt on a horse, flanked by an indigenous American and an African American. And the whole composition of the statue seems problematical, and so it's been removed and moved to the Theodore Roosevelt Library, I think it is, in South Carolina. And I don't know what statue they will be putting in front of this museum to replace it. But they haven't completely removed Theodore Roosevelt. And so here's Theodore with Len, just resting in the lobby of the museum. And and I had to get a picture of them. Have any of you been to the American Museum of Natural History? Not everybody, some of you. This is the second time I've been here, and I love this museum. In one of the major, well, here's the front lobby. So you've got this mother brontosaurus. I think there's a new name for them these days, like Apatosaurus or something, but I'm not up on dinosaurs. And here's her baby, but they're being attacked by a T.Rex. So it's a very dramatic, exhibit, except everybody's a skeleton. They also have halls that are geographically named. There's an African hall, there's a North American hall, and in these halls are dioramas that are created out of, as far as I can tell, these are actual elephants that have been taxidermied, and it's like this herd of elephants walking through the middle of the gallery. And the first time I saw this, I was really kind of dismayed. There are dioramas all around the edges, and in each one it looks like the scientists went to some venue. In this one, it was in Africa, and they took a photograph of it, and then they killed absolutely everything, animals, birds, plants, everything, shipped them all to New York and recreated the water hole here. But I got to thinking this time that if it's not true yet, it's going to be true very soon, that there are going to be animals that are extinct in the wild. And the only place you'd be able to see them is in an exhibit like this. They won't be in the zoos, and they won't be in the wild. And even, with the modern molecular genetics, we got DNA, we can study the enzymes, we can learn a lot. And so suddenly these specimens become valuable in a different way, in my way of thinking. So I kind of walked around, with my eyes wide and my jaw open. One of the reasons I wanted to go to this is I remember when Lucy, the very, very early humanoid skeleton was found in Africa. And this is probably not the actual original skeleton, this is a casting of it. But it was very powerful to me to see that. And there's what used to be called, I think it was called the Northwest Indian Hall, which is an amazing place. They have a number of full-size totem poles from Northwest North America and exhibitions of artifacts. But the pictures that I took, because I was so powerfully moved by this, tell the story of the fact that the museum is re-envisioning entirely how they talk about and explore and present indigenous American cultures. And so they have recruited a group of 10 Native scholars, not all elders, because I think this is actually one of the scholars in the group, who are consulting with them to recreate and reimagine how what's now called the Northwest Coast Hall will talk about these indigenous cultures in a time when we have, I think, more appreciation for the fact that they are still here. These are not like extinct cultures that we present in the way that we present stuffed elephants, for example. That our people are strong and resilient, that racism around indigenous Americans is a conversation that we need to be having. And again, I was just so powerfully moved that I needed to take these pictures and just sit in that place where this museum, which goes back 100 years, and then some probably, it's not erasing the past ways in which we talked about certain things, but now we think about them differently. Instead, it is showing us how the changes are happening and showing us what misconceptions we had in the past and how we could view it differently now. So I was really very deeply moved by that. We made our way back to Elizabeth, New Jersey, And we sat around a table in a Salvadoran restaurant and ate good food. And Len, the philosophy professor, led us in a conversation about the day and what had impressed us the most and what had disappointed us. And that, too, was a fascinating conversation. And then we went back to the hotel and we had a good night's sleep. And the next morning, we walked 4 bridges, we took 1 ferry, and we toured 1 church in 1 day. We did go to Bayonne, New Jersey. We took a hired car. It was Lyft most of the time because they would charge by the ride, and so then we could all split it up, and it was less expensive than Uber. This is the Bayonne Bridge, and the bridge is it's an arched bridge, so architecturally the arch carries the weight of the bridge and of the vehicles on the bridge. And this is the roadbed as the bridge was originally constructed in 1931. But this bridge guards the entrance to the Newark, New Jersey harbor, which is a major ocean shipping port. And so over time, more and more of the ships and the cargoes that were coming in are packed in containers and loaded on ships. And they didn't fit under this roadbed. So the bridge was redesigned and modified in 2019 to accommodate these container ships. The bridge runs from, wait a sec, did I not put that on a slide? Yeah, that's right. The bridge runs from New Jersey to Staten Island, and we walked it in that direction. Here is us starting out. We had to have some selfies to begin with, but you can see it was a gorgeous day. No rain, no wind, sunshine, not too warm. And this bridge has a roadway in the center and a walkway along the side, and off we went. This is the harbor. These are some of these boats that wouldn't fit under the Bayonne Bridge until they raised the roadbed and changed the view, the silhouette of the bridge. Another picture of containers in port. You remember all that talk about the supply chain and all the things we couldn't get? This is where they were waiting for us, is in Newark, New Jersey. We crossed the state line from New Jersey to New York. This is the bridge seen from Staten Island. And then we called a lift, and it took us to the Staten Island ferry terminal. I'd never even seen the Staten Island ferry, but I'd heard of it. Huge boat, beautiful terminal. The route of the Staten Island ferry is from the tip of Staten Island to the southern tip of Manhattan. So we went into the terminal, we went downstairs, we got on the ferry, and we sailed past New York Harbor, past the Statue of Liberty. There's me. From the ferry, we could see 2 of the bridges we were planning to walk. This one with the wider pillars is the Brooklyn Bridge. The one behind it with the narrower pillars is the Manhattan Bridge. You can see they're both suspension bridges. And so it was neat to be able to see where we would be going. As we came into the harbor, we were all hanging over the side of the boat watching. And then we made our way, again, I think, this might have been a subway, I can't remember how we got from the terminal to the Manhattan Bridge, which runs from Chinatown in Manhattan to downtown Brooklyn. It was built in 1909. And here's where the Manhattan Bridge crosses from Manhattan to Brooklyn. And by this time, the sun was a little higher, there was a little more shade. This is a gorgeous bridge. We could look down upon Chinatown as we started out. The architecture and the construction is just unbelievable. When you think about building a bridge, nowadays I don't think we take the time or the care to have carved stone all of these rivets, each one, put in by a laborer, all of the cables that support and divide up the weight so that it will carry traffic and trains and pedestrians. And we got to the far side of the bridge. Some of us got there before others, and we kind of gathered at the end. There's the sign that says, if you turn around and go backwards, you can walk across the Manhattan Bridge. But instead, we walked a few blocks across Brooklyn. We passed this sculpture, which I just thought was really interesting, the strength of that pointing arm, so I took a picture of that. Nafis knows what it is, but I don't. And then we came to the Brooklyn Bridge. And the Brooklyn Bridge, okay, so this is the Manhattan Bridge going from Manhattan to Brooklyn. Here's the Brooklyn Bridge going back the other way, which is why we could see the two of them from the ferry. And we crossed the Brooklyn Bridge around noon, and it was a gorgeous sunny day, and it was kind of like a street fair on the Brooklyn Bridge. It is a most beautiful bridge. The walkway on this bridge runs up the center of the bridge with traffic on either side of it, and there's only one, as far as I remember, there's only one level. What I know is it was just so much fun to walk it. There were people from all over the world. You could hear them speaking different languages and with different accents, and there were vendors alongside the walkway selling T-shirts and keychains and playing music and taking photographs, and it was just lovely. I had to take this picture. Sorry. But the bridge itself, it says, and this is on the back of one of the pillars, and I was reading it with great interest, and it says, the bridge is dedicated to the memory of Emily Warren Roebling, born in 1843, died in 1903, whose faith and courage helped her stricken husband, Colonel Washington A. Roebling, civil engineer, to complete the construction of this bridge from the plans of his father, John Roebling, who gave his life to the bridge. So far, so good. And then, in my opinion, they ruined it by saying, back of every great work, we can find the self-sacrificing devotion of a woman. And I thought, too bad. This is essentially what you saw on the opening slide. The opening slide was a photograph that was framed and mounted just outside the elevator in the hotel that we were staying in. We'll come back to it and you'll get to see it again. But if you remember, there were 4 people walking up here on this cable and using these cables as kind of handrails. That was when the bridge was under construction. You can't do that now, although there are doorways in these baffles. I suppose if they need to replace something or repair something, then professionals can do this, but your average New York pedestrian can no longer walk on the cables. But I was also just, again, so impressed by the symmetry and the geometry of these cables that hold that bridge up and distribute the weight evenly, and it's just so beautiful. After we finished walking the Brooklyn Bridge, we had lunch, and then we took a subway up Manhattan into Spanish Harlem. I took this picture of the Malcolm Shabazz Mosque. This was the mosque in which Malcolm X served as the minister. I do have a friend who was a member of that church as a child. He was her first minister, and this was her church. But what we did then is we took another lift ride across the island. Did I just skip a slide? Yeah. We went across the island to the banks of the Hudson River, and we visited the Riverside Church. This was built in 1930. It was funded by the Rockefellers, and they brought in stonemasons and craftspeople from Europe to do the stonework and the woodwork. So this is a picture of the main sanctuary with the stained glass windows which are being restored. So some of these have been, I think they've actually been removed and replaced by a screen that's printed with a design, but they're being restored, cleaned, and then reinstalled. These ones have already been done. The lights were made by T.H.E. and Company. T.H.E. did not make the windows, but T.H.E. initially was apparently a high-end lighting manufacturer. And it's just a most gorgeous church. This is the choir. This is, I believe, the organ pipes are behind here. Robert, is that right?
Roughly speaking, yes.
Roughly speaking, yes. Okay. There is a labyrinth in the floor. It's just beautiful. And here's a crucifix, gold-plated. There is a tower on this church that goes, and on the 20th floor there's like a library there, or a meeting room, and it has windows that face in each of the 4 directions. So this is a picture that I took. I think this is facing northward. This is the George Washington Bridge, which is the last bridge we were going to walk. This is Grant's tomb, where Ulysses Grant's wife is buried. This is part of Union Theological Seminary, and some of the theological schools are there. Columbia is in the other direction, and we decided to walk down there and just sit and have a little rest on the steps. Uh-oh. What did I do? Okay, there's a picture or two missing, but that's fine. I was trying to take pictures of Columbia, but there are all these students all over the place, and they kept walking in front of the camera. So our goal was to cross the George Washington Bridge from northern Manhattan to Fort Lee, New Jersey at sunset. And so we made our way to the New York end. See, there's Riverside Church. Here's where the George Washington Bridge runs, and we made our way to the Manhattan end of it. That's what the bee does. It makes it dark. And this, it's kind of complicated to get onto the George Washington Bridge. I understand it's also true that it's complicated to get on it by car, and I've talked to more than one person who got on it by accident and found themselves driving across it, not intending to. This is me and Susie as we set out. There are 2 levels on this bridge, and there's traffic that runs, I believe, in both directions on both levels, and then on either side of the bridge on the outside, there are sidewalks for pedestrians and for bicycles. One of the sidewalks was closed for repair, which meant we had pedestrians, bicycles, people walking their dogs. I think there might have been some motorcycles. It was interesting, and you had to kind of keep your wits about you. And the other thing that I was paying attention to, aside again from here's the 2 levels. That actually looks to me like a train, but I'm not sure. All of these cables, all of the geometry of the way these bridges were built is just amazing. And you can see sunset is approaching. This is the Hudson River. And it is well guarded so that people do not climb up over the railing and jump. And at least 5 places along that walkway, I saw these signs, and again, it just struck me, and I had to have a picture. Each one had a quotation. What they say are real words from someone who stood right where you stand and who made a call to a suicide hotline. And this particular quote was, "There was never a night or a problem that could defeat sunrise or hope." This is the New York skyline, the Hudson River, from the George Washington Bridge. And there we are, coming towards the end as the sun is setting behind Manhattan. So I come back to the picture that we started with. And the reason that I do is my friend Paul wrote an email that evening that we ended our walk to our friend Len's wife. And he said, "We tried to stop Len from such full participation. But ever the teacher, he insisted. His bravery and bridge walking skill clearly exceeded the rest of us. If you look carefully, he is the second in line above the red dot and wearing a smile, seemingly relaxed and at peace with the world below." I'll just let you know that Len and I both are afraid of heights, and there is no way that he would have done that. But Paul said, Sally summed it up nicely. Len epitomizes Earlham's instructional ideal, which emphasizes the importance of modeling a balance between grit and determination on the one hand and the building of a sense of community on the other, both qualities necessary to foster and maximize learning. "We had a lot of fun together," Paul wrote. "All in all, the 7 of us collectively logged 140 miles in 2 days. That's about 10 miles apiece. No, about 20 miles apiece. 10 miles a day. And the majority of us, as the photograph reveals, enhanced our sense of balance, while the other 3 ended up strengthening their swimming skills." Jim remarked afterwards in his typically understated way, "Experiential learning really requires that you get your feet wet." So that is my amazing adventure. I am so grateful to Earlham College, who brought all of us together, to everybody who was on the walk, to Paul, who had the dream, and Susie, who helped make it come true, and to Karen Filipsky, who is my neighbor over at Friends Homes West, who encouraged me to create this slideshow. And I want to thank you all for coming. I am happy to answer any questions or elaborate on anything if anybody has a question.
I also have a microphone in the back, so if you raise your hand, we'll all be able to hear the question.
No questions.
Do you have a slideshow on indigenous people?
Do I have a slideshow on a show on Indigenous people? I do not.
Something that you would go back to, so I
Yeah. Thank you. I would like to have a conversation with you. No, I don't. I am very, very much a learner. I did go to hear Robin Wallkimmer over at Guilford a couple of months ago, but I am in no way knowledgeable about Indigenous culture or the way that European Americans interact with it, which I think is problematical a lot of times. So, other questions?
How long did you take, Sally, on that day you walked the bridges?
How long did we take on the day we walked the bridges? I think we tried to leave the hotel about 7:30 in the morning. And we probably got back about 7 or 7:30 in the evening. And then we went out to dinner.
I don't really have a question, but Carol Fenway and myself were both Oakland students way back some time ago.
Yes, we did. I remember at the poetry class, yeah.
Mom, I got a question.
Okay, well, I have a privileged information, y'all, because this is my mom, and she's quite an adventurous spirit. So I have to know, Mom, what is next? Like, I want to know what how this whole experience fed you, and maybe what it is inspiring you to do next, whether it's a bridge walk or maybe I don't know.
Thank you for that question, Hafiz. As I was heading up to meet the group, I flew from Greensboro into LaGuardia and then up to Providence. And so coming into LaGuardia in the morning, in the daylight, I could look down on all these bridges in New York. And I didn't at that point have the orientation to be able to know which of the ones we were going to walk. But I got to thinking sort of philosophically about bridges. And there's a lot, we often talk about building bridges across differences, building bridges to connect people. But it occurred to me that it's only if people cross the bridges that anything interesting begins to happen. And so as I prepared for the trip, I was thinking, well, so we are going to cross the bridges. And what are we going to learn? And it was a great experience. So in the group, the people in that group, Jim lives in Atlanta, although I think they're moving up to Rhode Island. The initial idea came out of a conversation between Paul and Ernie about the vistas in Boston versus the vistas in New York. And so there is talk about maybe a Washington trip or maybe a Boston trip. I grew up in Cleveland, and there are some pretty amazing bridges in Cleveland. I said, shoot, there's the bridges of Madison County, wherever that is, you know. So there might be another bridge walk. And it may be that I think the group will sort of stay in touch, and we may come up with a completely different idea. Do you have a suggestion? I'll tell you though, to reconnect with people after a 50-year hiatus, and spend 2 days doing the variety of things that we did together, and then, you know, kind of debriefing in the evening, and it opens you up. It opens you up. So I would love to do something like that again. And I'm not totally sure my knees would do another bridge walk. I don't know. We'll have to see.
How about your foot, Sally?
Say it again.
How about your foot?
My foot's better. My foot's better. I broke my foot after the bridge trip. Yeah, but actually on the day that I first did this slideshow, I didn't realize it was broken at the time, but yeah. So, Wynn, you're going to have to get me in shape.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
What years were you at Earlham?
I started at Earlham in 1968 and graduated in 72.
Why did you choose a Quaker school, Sally? Because I know you were a Presbyterian at one point.
Well, yeah, right. At one point I was a Presbyterian. At one point, Wynn's family went to the same Presbyterian church in Euclid, Ohio that my family did probably a number of years earlier. We did not overlap. My mother was Scottish and was raised a Presbyterian, and she had my father, who was raised Jewish, drive us to the church on Sunday morning and drop us off and pick us up afterwards. And then when I started to get into trouble for asking too many inappropriate questions about which came first, dinosaurs or Adam and Eve, that kind of thing, we went and found the Unitarian church. And there was a couple in our Unitarian church who had both graduated from Earlham. And they said to me, we think you ought to go here. And I said, okay, and did nothing about it. But they contacted the school, and the school sent me an application packet. And my dad took me to visit, and I'm really glad I went there. So, yeah, it's part of why I'm here now, because I want to keep that Quaker connection. Any other comments, questions? Hannah.
Have you visited any other bridges that were impressive?
Oh, I love that question.
I'm a bridge enthusiast.
Are you?
Repeat
Let's
the question.
talk. Let's talk, Hannah.
Repeat the question.
There is, of course, the bridge, the Friends Homes Bridge.
That one's in my top 5.
In your top 5, it's a beautiful bridge. It's a beautiful bridge from above and also from below, and I can't wait till things start growing under it, and it'll be even more beautiful. So, yeah. These are all motor bridges, for cars and trucks and sometimes trains, and the pedestrian walkway is kind of an afterthought. But there are a lot of bridges in the world that are basically pedestrian bridges, and that's a whole different category. So,
There's some beautiful covered bridges in New England.
yeah, covered bridges in New England. There are, there's stone bridges in some in the United States. There are some gorgeous bridges in Cleveland, Ohio. Some majestic big ones, yeah. And also some, I can think of some that the road goes under, and they're just these big, beautiful arched bridges. So let's talk, Hannah.
Have you visited Scotland, Sally?
I have visited Scotland, and I've seen the beautiful bridges in Scotland.
Margaret and I are both from Scotland, as you know, and Fran just said she needs to look at the beautiful bridges in Scotland.
Yeah. And then, aren't there bridges, I think, in Rome, and there are bridges in Paris? I mean, this could be a thing. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much.
Did you get the middle one anyway? Oh, I don't know, was it good, but I did it.
Yeah, he was there when I was there. I didn't know.
Yeah, so most of my I put him sort of sobbing. Oh, she is a sweetheart.